I think that was the moment where I realized, like, I'm in the business of helping people be healthy, but then why am I making myself sick?
Welcome to How I Doctor, where we're bringing joy back to medicine. Dr. Emily Silverman is a practicing internal medicine physician, fellow San Franciscan, and the founder of the popular podcast series The Nocturnist that shares raw, honest, deeply human stories from healthcare workers. I'm excited to talk to Emily today for many reasons. First, she's a fellow physician podcaster. Second, her series on shame in medicine has helped me personally, and I think should be required listening for everyone. And third, so I can learn about Emily's personal experiences with burnout and the groundbreaking work that she has pioneered in using storytelling to address that. Welcome to How I Doctor, Dr. Emily Silverman. I think maybe we'll start talking a little bit about burnout and then move to the podcast. Do you have a memory that, like a core memory that comes out and says, oh yeah, this is me burnt out, or I'm starting to recognize something's changed about me?
I do. It wasn't a split second moment, but it was more a period of time or an episode. Grew up wanting to doctor. I didn't have any doctors in my family, but for whatever reason, when I was like 5 years old, I was running around the playground saying, I want to be a doctor. I want to be a doctor. And I'm not sure exactly where it came from. I loved my pediatrician. I loved science. I loved biology. I loved the body and understanding it and what it is and how it works. And I think my way in was a little bit more through that wonder. So for me personally, it took the shape of a health issue. So I was about halfway through residency. I was working really long hours, as people do when they're in residency. So every other month, I would work 28-hour shifts every fourth night. And there was actually this one scheduling fluke that occurred where it was a 4-week rotation and it was 2 weeks on the hospital wards and it was 2 weeks in the ICU. So it was sort of a split in half month. And the ICU and the hospital ward had different call schedules. And it just so happened that I finished my hospital week on a call day. And then the next day switched to ICU and landed on a call day. And so I was actually scheduled to work 2 28-hour shifts in a row. I reached out to the program leadership and they offered me a few things of, they were like, you can call Jeopardy to cover 12 hours to give you a break, or you could just do it and then take another day off at the end. And I actually already had a day off scheduled at the end. And for all of the shame in medicine reasons, decided not to take them up on the offer to call Jeopardy because of so many cultural reasons that I'm sure you and your listeners understand. So I ended up just working 2 28-hour shifts in a row and came out of that feeling just feeling, I don't know, like something isn't right. And then it was actually later that month when I started to experience pelvic pain and had some like changes and issues with my cycle. And that catapulted me into a year-long actually struggle with pelvic pain and what later ended up being diagnosed as endometriosis and culminated in me having a surgery. And, the surgeon was like, oh my God, it was like all over your pelvis. And I don't know, part of me feels like it was the body says no kind of a thing. Like, it was like the cycle right after that back-to-back shift where everything went haywire. And I think at a certain point, if you force yourself to work that hard, your body just says no. I think that was the moment where I realized, like, I'm in the business of helping people be healthy, but then why am I making myself sick? That was one of the things that launched me into this journey of trying to better understand things about medical culture that weren't working, and also just the state of healthcare in general, and how physician overwork and physician burnout was not just a me issue or my hospital issue, but actually a national issue and actually an international issue in some cases. So that's how that was my low point.
I immediately knew I could immediately tell you what she's about to say about, like, oh, she's going to get stuck with like 2 call shifts in a row. I immediately knew that because that's just it. That is part of medical culture that, like, oh, probably the hospitalists and the ICU doctors aren't thinking about this from a resident perspective. They aren't thinking about a rotator. They're just both doing their own schedules and expecting the resident to just kind of like figure it out, or like, okay, just keep going, push through. Emily, how do you think that the other players besides physicians in the system, whether it's a residency director or a chair of a department or they're a healthcare executive and administrator, how can they be part of the solution to burnout as opposed to it being like a physician thing that only physicians or other healthcare workers can really solve themselves?
This question of how to fix burnout is one that's haunted me for a while. There's so many different layers to that. There's obviously like the personal individual layer, which is the layer we have the most control over, which I think there's some studies that show that like 20% of burnout is made up of like individual personal factors. Things like editing your schedule, changing things about your lifestyle, changing jobs or, exercising more and all those things. But we all have the same reaction when we're told to like meditate and do yoga that's not going to get us all the way where we need to be. And so that remaining 80%, that's a systems level stuff, trying to identify pain points and remedy those through QI projects and things like that. That's sort of like small scale improvements. There's tools we have like, labor actions and unions and things like that. People have mixed feelings about whether or not that works or not. It does seem like the tide is turning and physicians are starting to turn to that more than they have in the past. So that's another thing. And then also just looking at the sprawling web of businesses that is the US healthcare system and asking ourselves, how much of that is trickling down and affecting us day to day. And, what do we think about things like private equity coming in and buying up hospital systems and changing workflows? And what do we think about the fact that, the old country family medicine doctor who cares for the community, that's becoming more and more of an endangered species, and things are getting much more consolidated and starting to feel a little bit more factory-like, a little bit more fast food-like, some might even say, and how that is affecting our sense of, being more of a cog in a system as opposed to being, a physician in society who has agency over, what they're able to do with their patients. And I think for somebody who's grinding at the bedside, like some of us have more time than others to engage in that fight. And so, for those who do have time and space and energy to do that, by all means. And then, sometimes looking outside of the profession to allies who can help us can also be helpful. And that includes nurses, because we know nurse burnout is also a huge problem. I learned a lot about that when we did our COVID storytelling project. I received a lot of emails from nurses talking about similar patterns going on with them too. So hopefully we'll move in a better direction in the future.
Thousands of doctors are joining Off Call to connect, collaborate, and navigate the challenges of modern medicine. From career advice to compensation transparency, we're building a community that supports physicians and helps to change things. Don't go it alone. Visit offcall.com and sign up to join our growing network of doctors who are taking back control of their careers. Ever feel like everyone else in healthcare is making money hand over fist, while doctors are the ones always getting pay cuts? That's where Off Call comes in. At Off Call, we're helping doctors take back control of medicine. The next time you're asked to see more patients in less time, or forced to submit yet another prior authorization for your patients, Off Call is here to help. Visit offcall.com and sign up today to join a community that's putting doctors back in control of their careers.
Let me move a little bit to the Nocturnist, because I just absolutely love it. How did you decide to start it? Was it inspired by your own personal experience with burnout or your own challenges, or where did it come from?
Yeah, so my whole life, I had this artistic, gravitational pull toward the arts. I did it for fun, but I also did it because it was the way I found that I was able to understand the world the best. I was never a huge data person. I was much more of a narrative person, a storytelling person. And then what ended up happening is right around the time that I was hitting that burnout wall, not just because of my health issues, but other things, noticing things about medical culture and also noticing things about healthcare was changing in the last 10 and 20 years and what that meant for us, and how many hours we were spending at computers, I started to crave a space where we could all come together and process together and tell stories about our experience. And actually, it started as an idea for a blog, and I wrote blog posts and I invited guest blog posts from my friends. And that was fun in a lot of ways, but I noticed in the end that it wasn't advancing the conversation. And there were already a lot of really amazing medical literary magazines out there, the Bellevue Literary Review and Examine Life Journal and Intima and places like like that. And so I remember asking myself, like, what is this adding? What can I bring that's fresh? What can I bring that's new? And then a friend of mine invited me to go see a live taping of The Moth at San Francisco Public Works, which for the listeners who may not know what The Moth is, it's a oral storytelling program. It's often heard on NPR. And so I walked out of that event and I said, I'm going to try this for the medical community. And the very first live show that we did was January of 2016. And that was kind of off to the races from there.
It feels like the path to medical training, kind of the pre-med stuff, even preclinical med school and med school and residency, a lot of it is like getting rid of creativity. Step one, here is a multiple choice question. Here is the answer. And there's only one answer, and there's three other incorrect answers. And then when you become an attending, you have, I think, both the opportunity, but also the need to kind of be a little bit more creative and make your medical plans a little bit more creative, because you realize there are multiple ways to practice medicine, and your patient that's coming in to see you may have very different values or different expectations, and you have to often get more creative. And so it is interesting that we hammer this thing out of all these humans, and then I don't think we do a very good job of acknowledging that the creativity actually needs to come back. I think that's actually what makes somebody a particularly good physician as well.
I get so many emails from people. They say, I feel like I lost myself. I lost a piece of myself, or I lost my creativity. And it's like, why do we have this again and again and again? People coming up through the medical education system and emerging on the other side, very well trained, extremely skilled, very good at what they do, but feeling like there's been a sort of death or something is atrophied inside of them. And is that a normal, natural, necessary part of the process, or is there a way we can rethink that? I think there's a lot about medical training where your brain is trained a certain way. And some of that's beautiful. When I'm talking to someone and they're a doctor, even if I don't know they're a doctor, I can sometimes kind of tell, because there's a clarity of communication, I think, that I just pick up on sometimes. I'm like, are you a physician? And sometimes they'll be like, oh yeah, and I'm like, how did I know? And it's because a certain turn of phrase or a way that they spoke. But I think you're exactly right. There is sometimes, I think, in that process, we lose the ability to riff or to improvise or to get into that spontaneity. Maybe it's because of the sheer number of hours that our brain spends in that structured environment that it literally does atrophy the part of our brain that's more open. And so how can we create those opportunities for people coming up through med ed to make sure that we exercise those muscles so that they don't atrophy and then get, depressed 20 years down the line.
Emily, looking at the evolution of the show, have your goals for it changed at all, or your thoughts on how it should work?
It has. In the beginning, it was very, very centered on frontline clinicians and their voices and their experiences. And we produced well over a dozen live storytelling performances with frontline clinician talent. These were ordinary people, doctors and nurses, getting up on stage and sharing their experience. 9 years later, I feel like I've gotten a lot of that, out, and I'm sort of itching, okay, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? So I've been thinking a lot more about patient voices, more about subjective experiences of illness or disease from inside the patient's perspective and what clinicians might learn from that. We recently had a guest on the show, Susanna Fox, who wrote a book called Rebel Health, which is all about patients experimenting and tinkering on the fringes of medicine to solve their own problems. So that was really humbling to me, getting more into that perspective. So that's something that I'm feeling myself drawn toward. Also feeling myself drawn much more lately toward bigger structural questions. So health policy stuff. We just had on Dhruv Kular, who's a physician writer for The New Yorker. He wrote this piece called The Gilded Age of Medicine is Here. And we're talking about private equity, and we're talking about the data being the oil of the healthcare system. And what does that mean? And sort of these bigger level questions, all sorts of different ways that the conversations on the show have evolved beyond, the first person storytelling.
Spent a lot of time talking about being normal, or the ideal physician. Why do you think that is, that physicians really have this ideal that we maybe never measure up to, or that we're somehow not normal for having emotions and feelings, and that I need to listen to a podcast to be reminded that other people feel the same way as me?
I think for physicians, because they're interfacing with life and death, it's a bit different than other professions, which are dealing, more abstractly with money or with legal things or with systems or business. Like nobody dies if a contract doesn't get signed or something. Usually,
Usually.
but I think on some level it does make people uncomfortable to realize that the person holding their life, whether that's in the ER or in the OR or in some other way, is a flawed human.
Yeah.
And we don't like that.
Whoa.
And I think that's where we implement things like systems and processes and checklists and AI and decision support and like kind of layering on as much as we can to augment our natural human abilities. But then remembering that it is those human flaws sometimes that can kind of ironically be turned inside out and become an asset. So, if I've gone through a difficult time in my life, I just shared the story of a personal health issue, for example, that I went through. Like I can connect with a patient in a way that I wouldn't otherwise because of that personal experience.
How do you encourage physicians to share these vulnerable stories that they do on your podcast?
I always remind people that they have agency over what they share and what they don't share. So anything that they do share, they have full agency over that, and that's their choice. And I think some of that is about, building that culture of safety and celebrating the humanity, shining light on it, doing it in community, things like that. And I think people also hunger for it. I think there's something can be really cathartic about coming forward to talk about a challenge that you face and then come out the other end being embraced by your community, and rather than say being rejected or shamed by your community. That's actually really important for the health of communities. It binds them together. And sometimes we tell people like, this may not be the moment to tell this story. People will present us with stories about some challenge that they faced, and maybe that challenge was, 3 months ago.
Yeah, too fresh.
And they get into it and we're like, you know what, this feels a little too fresh. Like, let's revisit in 6 months or let's revisit in 12 months. It's about being in dialogue with people and kind of following their lead.
You're recently a new mom. Congratulations. Maybe can you share a story about some of the challenges that you face today that maybe you didn't face a year ago, 2 years ago?
What's changed? I think for me, what can be tough sometimes is like losing mornings, losing evenings. I don't want to say losing. I get so much. I love, spending time with my kids, but my eldest, I have two, she has gone through this thing where she doesn't want to sleep by herself. And lately I've been sleeping with her more. And sometimes, I'll lay down with her and lay there till she falls asleep. But then by the time she falls asleep, I'm really sleepy, and sometimes I fall asleep and it's 8:30 and then I lose my evening. So definitely have to budget my time more intentionally than I did in the past. Yeah, and I also just think about wanting to role model for them, wanting to, build a life that is happy and rich and, give them things I didn't have and make sure that they're in an environment of unconditional love and warmth. And how do I balance that with the fact that there's so many, things I want to be doing professionally and creatively. And so that's always a balance. But I would say on the whole, it's been a huge plus, and I highly recommend it to anyone listening.
Emily, what systemic changes do you think could better support women in medicine?
I mean, it came up for me when I got pregnant, of course. Maternity leave, child, is great. Like, let's have maternity leave so that, we can bond with our little ones, not worry that we're going to lose our job and lose our income, that kind of thing. And God, what a great invention, maternity leave. Like, who came up with that? Like, they should get a medal. It's so wonderful to be able, and now dads are getting it too, to be able to make space for those human experiences amongst what, is often a decade plus long career. And just little things that can help, like childcare is so expensive, and like, how do we think about that? And I'm really fortunate to have an amazing husband, but thinking about like family structures and how do we, optimize that? What do we think about things like family and community and how that can fill some of the gaps in addition to, more detached institutions like corporations and the government? Like, I don't want all of my help to come from corporations and the government. Like, how do we build communities that can support each other as well in that more human way? I will say, though, that a lot of some of my greatest allies and cheerleaders in my career have been men, and I've been fortunate to be supported and lifted up to Dave Logan and Dustin Corcoran and Mark Shapiro and many others who have supported me along the way.
I have this theory that it is very much a healthcare workers market right now. I mean, we have physicians leaving the practice of medicine. We have patients that are sicker and more complex. The workload is higher and higher. I feel like it would be a big job benefit if we had a health system or a hospital that offered better childcare. Like that it's kind of a pro-family benefit. It is a problem. There are many double physician or double healthcare worker parent households. And so it feels like that is like an obvious benefit that a hospital or a health system could offer that would drive healthcare workers to want to work there as well.
What a great idea. If I worked at a big hospital, I don't anymore, but if I did, if they had like a lovely little childcare, and there's, some hospitals have nursing facilities, old folks' homes attached to them, like why not also have daycare, and then, maybe the old folks and the kids can hang together and you can get some intergenerational interactions going on. Yeah.
One of the things we're working on with this platform Off Call is trying to address salary transparency and benchmarking and trying to level the playing field. How do these issues impact female physicians differently or in more notable ways that you found?
There's evidence out there that there's still a wage gap, I believe. So, that's something to look at. But I've been very fortunate to, I think once you were hitting attending, I have to say, it is bizarre to go from med school, where you're hemorrhaging money, to residency, where if you look at the per hour wage, it's working class, if not less. And then you graduate from residency and then boom, it's like $200K. Like that whiplash just feels really strange. And there feels to me like there's something wrong there. Like my value didn't quintuple overnight. I do wonder about like how we could potentially smooth out some of that transition or just think differently about those steps up the ladder and what does that mean? I can see why people want to hold on to their big salaries, and maybe they would be less guarded around those salaries if we could fix some of these other upstream issues. The other way I think about it is like take a list of all the medical specialties and then look at what they get paid. And that's a really interesting conversation to have. Like quantized services. So like knee replacement, cardiac cath, like colonoscopy, you can measure them out, like how many have you done? But then something more amorphous and more relationship-based, like primary care, family medicine, pediatrics, psychiatry, like these are the specialties that because you can't like dispense a unit of mental health as a psychiatrist. And also you wouldn't want to pay a psychiatrist on how many tabs of, Zoloft they prescribe either, because then those incentives get out of whack. So yeah, how do we think about like the services that we provide and sort of how those are quantized and measured and reimbursed? If you look at physicians and how they self-select and filter into these specialties, the relationship-based ones often are a little bit more female-dominated, for example. So that's another aspect of this conversation that I think could be really interesting to break open and explore.
Do you have career advice for younger women entering residency or becoming new attendings that you'd like to give out?
I would say first and foremost, follow your authenticity. When you have that feeling to pay attention and then shift and look at like, where do my aptitudes lead me? Where do my passions lead me? And just continue to follow that light. And it's a lot easier said than done because often there's voices, whether it's your parents or your boss or whoever telling you to be a certain thing or go a certain way. And the more you can turn those voices down and listen to like the inner voice and kind of where that's leading you, I think the better. And the other thing is to embrace creativity and how you think about building your career. I think there's a lot of, off the shelf jobs that you can get, like constantly getting emailed by recruiters, big hospital systems looking to fill slots, and that might be a great fit for you. But if it's not a great fit for you, there's a lot of exciting stuff happening. There's a lot of digital health companies, there's a lot of telemedicine companies, there's direct primary care, which is a blossoming movement. And so just to be open-minded and ask around and do research, and you might be able to find something that's a really good fit that's outside of sort of the traditional box of what we think of with these jobs.
I think there's more and more physicians that want a kind of a diverse career. Maybe they want to do clinical medicine 3 days a week, but they want to do something else 2 days a week or 1 day a week.
Yes, I am one of those people. So right now I part-time outpatient primary care and part-time, podcasting, storytelling, writing, all those fun things. And that balance is really nice for me. And there's a lot of people who are able to carve out those types of jobs for themselves. A lot of them do that at academic medical institutions where they'll come on at 100% clinical and then they'll take on different jobs and roles and quote unquote buy down their time. A lot of friends who are like 30% clinical, 30% teaching, 30% research and have like a mishmash. But academic medicine is not the only way to do that. There's a lot of ways to do that. Because you're right, with health and tech and AI and policy and journalism and writing and storytelling, and we need physician voices in those spaces.
Thank you.
So badly. So if that is exciting to you, I would say lean into that because we really need you because the system we know isn't working and it's great people who are going to help guide it toward a better system.
Yeah, I think if anything, we need more physicians speaking out about their lived experiences of being a doctor so that other people can understand what we're going through and we can advocate for our patients and advocate for everything better in the healthcare system. Emily, I've got some quick questions just to round us out here. What's something you didn't learn in medical school but is crucial to your daily practice?
Well, there's a lot of businessy insurance stuff. I was talking to, who was it? I think it was Drew on the podcast. I was telling him I learned so much about immunology and like T cell receptors which I love, by the way. I think that stuff is so cool. But I didn't learn anything about like healthcare 101. This is how the American healthcare system works and how, where the payments,
where the money flows.
That kind of stuff I didn't learn in med school. And it's a real shame because patients ask all the time, like, oh, is this covered or how much is this? And I often don't know how to respond or I'm getting better at that. But a lot of doctors I find actually can't answer that because nobody knows.
Yeah. Last question, Emily. If you could send one message to yourself on your first day of residency, what do you think it would be?
Maybe something like setting boundaries. Like, what would have happened if I had called in the 12-hour Jeopardy coverage when offered? Would I not have gotten sick? You're going to feel guilt. You're going to feel like you should just power through. But and which is not to say that you shouldn't work hard and give it your all and give it your best and take ownership over your patients and stay late if there's a day where you're like, I'm going to stay late because XYZ. But that in those moments, like the moment I described at the top of this episode where I was like, this doesn't feel right, 2 20-hour shifts in a row. When you get to those moments, having, the permission to set a boundary and take care of yourself. So maybe something along those lines.
Emily, where can listeners find you and support the work that you're doing right now?
Yes. So I run a medical storytelling live show and podcast called The Nocturnist. You can learn more about that at thenocturnist.org. You can learn more about me on my personal website, emilysilverman.com. And if you want to reach out to me by email, you can do that. I'm at emily.silverman@ucsf.edu. And I hope people check out The Nocturnist. It's been a really fun project.
Like I said earlier, I think the shame series, you guys have a 10-part series on shame that I think is extremely powerful. And if you listen to nothing else, please listen to that entire series. It's incredible. And I promise you, it will help you understand yourself as a physician as well.
And I'll add, we have a new series coming out this year on uncertainty in medicine.
Oh, amazing.
That I've learned a lot from. So keep an eye out for that as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me today. For interviews with physicians creating meaningful change, check out offcall.com/podcast. Make an account on OffCall to confidentially share your details about your work, and sign up for our newsletter where you can hear more about the latest trends we're seeing in physician pay. You can find How I Doctor on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll have new episodes weekly. This has been and continues to be Dr. Graham Walker. Stay well, stay inspired, and practice with purpose.